Ever since I, male, 45, bought my second house, my family has been pressuring me to share it with them. It's a small beachfront property in Gulfport, which I was able to bag for an affordable price, and I mostly bought it for investment purposes. However, my parents want to move into this house for free, and my deadbeat brother wants to join them. The thing is, I already gave them almost half of my earnings anyway. I started working as an architect and got my first client through contact from Dad, 70. Since then, I've expanded into design consultancy and even run my own online furniture business. Honestly, I think that it's because of the hard work that I've gotten to the point where I'm this wealthy. But my family believes that they're the ones who are directly responsible for my success. Of course, they paid for my college and landed me my first client, but they paid for my brother's college too, and he's barely getting by. He throws his money away on scams or alcohol, and they've never said a word to him. Honestly, with the amount of my earnings I've given to my parents, they are more than set for their golden years. It just feels like they want the benefit of a fancier property in a nicer area, and that too without paying a cent. The new house has soured things between me and my family. I'm single by choice, don't spend a lot, and honestly prioritize my parents' happiness too, which is why I sent them so much money. However, this house was going to be my passion project, and I was going to flip it for a profit. Even though I tried to explain that it wasn't about money and it was about the emotional attachment I had with this house, it fell on deaf ears. I ignored them and started working on the house without telling them, and it's currently halfway through remodeling. My brother Luke, male, 38, also keeps trying to make things worse between my parents and me. He and I have never gotten along and barely talk, with our parents acting as the only mediators between us. Now, if Mom and Dad end up moving to Gulfport, he'll be left in charge of their own home in Jackson with the primary goal of turning it into a kind of Airbnb. Not only will he live rent-free, but I doubt that any of the money he earns will go to my parents. I don't know how he thought up this arrangement, but for some reason, Mom and Dad are on board with it. With that being the situation, things were tense between me and my family for a while. I don't speak to them that often, but I still regularly send them money and had left the door open for communication. We'd meet during the 4th of July and Thanksgiving, but I could feel a difference in the way we interacted. It was almost as if they resented me. With that, things reached a tipping point a little over a month ago when my mom called me and said they weren't happy with my role as a son and asked me to meet them immediately. I was busy with work and couldn't go and speak to them immediately, but that somehow made things worse. When I was finally ready to talk to them and visit them in Jackson, they ignored all of my calls and weren't responding to my texts at all. I ended up having to call my brother, and he told me that Mom and Dad had banned me from their family space because how I hadn't prioritized them and wasn't willing to listen to their demands. He said, maybe if you could show them how much you care, OP, then things would be better, like that house, right? If you didn't want to flip it, maybe they would realize they matter more to you than things like money and your job. Just from his tone, I could tell that he was behind all of the trouble with my parents, but honestly, it couldn't just be chalked up to him. Mom and Dad were being gullible and letting that damage our relationship, and I needed to teach them a lesson. So I figured out a way to finally make my parents realize that my brother was an a-hole, while also showing them why exactly their demands were a bad idea. First things first, I texted Luke saying that he was right and that I needed to go over the logistics of shifting my parents into the second house, along with regaining their trust. Within 5 minutes, Luke called me and said, "It's great to see you change your mind, OP." Now, the next part was telling him about the remodeling status of the house. I admitted to him that I had started work on the house and there were a few niggles that needed to be sorted out, and sent him some pictures. Luke, being Luke, focused on himself first and said that it wasn't a big deal, that Dad was a pretty handy person and he'd live with the construction while things got sorted. I then said that I'll hand over the responsibility of making sure the house was livable to him, and that was that. He spoke to my parents, and I'm sure he downplayed the situation the house was in, ensuring he could live alone in our parents' house. After that, I got a call from my dad thanking me for listening and looking out for them, and how excited they were to move to a beachfront property. By giving them exactly what they wanted and gambling on my brother being an idiot and not bothering to fix up the house, I knew they wouldn't be satisfied with the way the house was. I mean, the kitchen tiling was literally in a pile on the floor, and half the light fixtures were being redone. These were things I had shown Luke, but I don't think he would have shown them to Mom and Dad. All I did after that was wait. Sure enough, after I picked up my parents in Gulfport and drove them to the house, I could tell they were livid as soon as I opened the door and showed them the state of the house. When I was questioned on it, I innocently said, "Oh, did Luke not tell you? It's part of taking the house. He should have fixed it by now." Then I left without even helping them unpack or sort out the moving truck. Soon after, I got an aggressive call from my brother claiming that I had lied about how bad the house was. I had not. He was simply an idiot who thought that a house can be fixed up in a couple of weeks with zero effort, and screaming at me about how this had affected our parents. They had moved all their stuff down to Gulfport and were now without a proper place to live. Their two options were to either move back immediately or check into a hotel. I do think I ended up teaching my family a lesson when it comes to constantly demanding things from me and not respecting my boundaries. But I do kind of feel like the a-hole for putting my parents through so much when the main issue was Luke. He basically didn't get inconvenienced by this at all, and all he has to deal with is our parents' anger, and if he's slimy enough, he could probably calm them down or shift the blame around. Did my plan backfire? Update 1. Okay, so I thought a little about what could happen, and I decided the best thing to do would be to come clean to my parents about what I did and ask them to stay with me for a few days. While they were with me, I learned that Luke didn't even mention that the house was being remodeled and only said there was a little bit of work to be done. They steadily got angrier and angrier at the way they had been treated, and honestly had a breakthrough when it came to realizing that my brother was mooching off of them. The icing on the cake was that one of their neighbors from Jackson called them and said that Luke had organized some kind of party at their house and had been extremely rude when people in the neighborhood asked him to tone it down. I mean, a 38-year-old acting like a teenager? It was just sad. Even though my parents have learned that my brother is a no-good freeloader, I did also vent and give them a piece of my mind about how they never respected my demands for the house and how they didn't appreciate the fact that I sent them so much of my earnings each year. They felt really bad and, in fact, asked me to stop sending them money each year as they had saved up enough to get by. They then dropped a bomb on me that a large chunk of that money was used by my brother to fund his business ideas or to screw around in attempts to upskill himself, which, since I knew what my brother got up to, was just fancy talk for taking vacations and doing random shit that counted, according to him, as life experience. After that, I offered them an ultimatum. I would remain their son if and only they banned Luke as they had banned me. It seems harsh, but it's only fair. It's no good if my brother never learns to be his person, and at this point, I despise his guts. To my surprise, my parents didn't take too much time to mull over it and said that they had changed their perspective on their youngest son after what he did to them with the house. They'll be moving back in a few days and then basically kicking Luke out. Update 2. So the parents are back home and I went with them to make sure Luke didn't try anything funny. At this point, I wouldn't put it past him. You guys can imagine exactly how well it went. Shouting, screaming, promises that he would change, accusations of me being a manipulator, ironic, and the works. Eventually, we threatened to call the cops and he went over and stayed with a friend of his. A couple of days later, he took his stuff and moved out, but not after borrowing a couple of grand from Dad to help him pay rent. We're never going to see that money again. Ha! But I guess he's going to find work and stand on his own feet now. I'm going to NC with him, and so are my parents, and I can only hope that my brother finally learns how to be a good person. Update 3. Nothing much to add, just that Luke was behaving like an absolute psycho. He kept the spare key for the house and came home one day and begged to be let back into the family. My parents stayed firm on their decision, but did tell him that if he could prove that he was an independent and mature person, they would speak to him and respect him as their son. I don't think he's going to change, but that's their choice, and I understand where they're coming from. I feel much less burdened and have a lot of extra money now that I don't send Mom and Dad much. I don't think I'll ever reinitiate contact with Luke, and that's also made me realize how much negativity I've cut out of my life. He always resented me and tried to make me feel bad, and that's just gone now. I do hope that he fixes things up, and if my parents forgive him after that, it's cool. But if I ever see them fall back into justifying his behavior or letting him manipulate them, I will just cut all 3 of them off for good. NTA, play stupid games and win stupid prizes. That's the best way to expose your manipulative bro. NTA, I do think that it's insane how you knew your brother wouldn't know how to fix up the house, or at least realize it wouldn't be livable. Really shows how he's blinded to anything except for his benefit. Next story. I, 40, female, have 4 kids, 16 male, 14 male, 10 female, and 8 female. With my husband, 45 male. My parents, 56 male and 56 female, had me when they were 16. I lived with my grandparents, Dad's parents, while they were in college. Eventually, they settled down and had other kids, much younger than me. The second youngest child, my younger sister, is 22 and is getting married this summer. Despite our age gap, I've always been close to my siblings and have been excited about my sister's wedding, but a recent argument has caused some issues for us. Our 14-year-old Drayson is a freshman in high school. He asked a girl out to the 7th grade dance 2 years ago. Shortly after, they started dating and dated for a bit over a year. Unfortunately, last summer, she was in a car crash with a family friend and she did not make it. Her parents and Drayson have stayed in touch and he's got some of her stuff. It's been tough on him, but Drayson has amazing friends who have helped him get through this. Drayson's girlfriend was Sri Lankan. While she and her parents were born in the US, her grandparents were not, and she had connections to her heritage. Both she and Drayson loved sports, so they would watch cricket together, and sometimes he'd go over to her house and eat traditional foods. For the 8th grade dance last year, she bought him and asked him to wear Sri Lanka flag cufflinks she saw online. He agreed to it, and it's something he cherishes as a gift from her. Note, our family is not Sri Lankan. Drayson has quite a few gifts from her, including clothes, but these cufflinks are the only thing that would be appropriate to wear at a wedding. As the wedding is approaching, we decided to start going suit shopping. Drayson found a suit he liked. We got it tailored and got the ready version last week. Drayson is a very confident person and felt good about the suit and even posted some photos to Instagram. On Sunday, we were at dinner at our parents' house. My sister and her fiance were there, and he asked if they wanted to see his fit. They agreed to see what he was wearing to the wedding. I could see my sister's face change while looking at him, and she, shortly after, asked to see me in private. She asked if he could not wear the cufflinks because they didn't match her wedding aesthetic. When I asked her to elaborate, all she said was that she's going for a traditional theme. And when I nudged her, she said she didn't think the cufflinks matched a traditional American wedding, and said she didn't want anything that could cause people discomfort. Shortly after that, we left, and I spoke about it with my husband, who agreed with me that her request was ridiculous. And we texted her saying he would be wearing them, and if he couldn't, he would not attend. She texted our parents and siblings, and it's caused a mess. Some of our family is siding with us, but others are saying because it's her wedding, we should respect her rules. AITA? NTA, I guess not matching a traditional American wedding aesthetic is the new way to say, I'm a racist a-hole. How in God's name can a 15-year-old's cufflinks cause people discomfort? This is so insulting and unnecessary, and there is no such thing as doing whatever the bride and groom say just because it's their wedding when they are being idiots. I would absolutely die on the hill, and just about any hill that involved someone telling me what jewelry I'm allowed to wear. I am not a native English speaker, and reading this, I thought, cufflinks are those small things on suits you hardly see, right? Then I thought, but why would she make such a big deal out of it? So I Googled it, and I was right. Cufflinks are those small things on suits. Why are people fighting over a teenager wearing such small, barely noticeable things? He knows they are there, and they give him emotional support, so he should wear them because he likes them. But any other person has to almost sniff his hands to notice the cuffs. Next story. We have been happily married for 7 years with a 4-year-old daughter. We rarely have disagreements, much less major arguments. She was born and raised in China, moved to the US in 2011, naturalized, and has no intention or desire to return. Her family, including her parents, live in China. She's currently a stay-at-home mom. I was born in Japan but was raised in the US. I am the family breadwinner and handle all our finances, etc. When our daughter was born, my wife's parents stayed with us for a whole year. I had apprehension about this, but we had a new baby, my wife was still working, and I didn't want them to feel unappreciated. They are objectively not bad people. They love our daughter and were helpful in supporting my wife. But there is a huge cultural and language divide that I'm not sure can be overcome. I realize it's normal in many other cultures for the in-laws, parents, to basically live with the family and grandchildren. But this certainly wasn't the case with me. My in-laws have been to the US all of 3 times. They don't speak English. They are not really aware of Western social boundaries and norms. They are of also the age where they aren't really interested in learning these norms. We live in an outer suburb that is not accessible by any other way than private vehicle, so they are essentially housebound the entire time they're here. When they came to stay with us the first time, I was initially happy to have them, but after a few months, that happiness started to turn into near resentment. We had no privacy. They had behaviors to them were maybe normal, innocent, but I found bothersome and disrespectful. Due to language, I was unable to directly communicate and ask them to change their behavior. The same coming from my wife was not effective due to cultural norms and we're your parents, we raised you, so you don't really get to tell us what to do. This placed an emotional and relational divide between me and my wife. I was also the FNG at work and working harder and longer than I am now. I I started to dread going home. I stayed at work long after my shifts had finished. It was the only way I could get away to have some time for myself. I became more withdrawn, and it was obvious. I felt trapped. I genuinely feared for our marriage at one point. Fast forward 4 years later. She wants to invite them over so they can spend time with our daughter. I am not opposed to this. She wants them to come for 6 months. I would be okay with maybe 2 or 3. She keeps coming up with reasons why it has to be 6 months. I'm simply not okay with this, especially how it affected our relationship last time. I also don't want our daughter to see me like I was 4 years ago. Once again, I feel like what I think doesn't matter, and if I don't go along, then it's because I don't like my in-laws, or I don't want them to spend time with our daughter, neither of which are the case. AITA here? Stop relying upon your wife for communication. Get an interpreter, but call them a friend, preferably an older male. Have a conversation with them about what you expect in your home. Be gentle, polite, and respectful. Ask what you can do to accommodate them and make them feel more comfortable. They will sit up and pay attention to the man of the house in ways they won't when their daughter speaks. That may not be fair, but this is the only way to get through to them. NTA, but you have more control of this situation than you think. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.